Good day, fellow Neverwinter players. So we're here today to talk about the Warlock. So I've got two different builds for the Warlock here, and I'm going to talk through both of them. So we have a DPS loadout, and I also have a healing loadout, and I'm going to talk through both of them relatively quickly. I'm not going to talk about attribute points or gear or boons or companions or mount insignia bonuses today. Let's be honest, if we're talking DPS or heals, it's pretty much going to be the same for everyone. There's some minor differences here and there, but overall, uh, when we start talking about best in slot items for DPS, there's very little variation there, and the same goes for the heals. So first off, I'm going to start on DPS, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the DPS. So from a at will perspective, your go-to at will is going to be Hand of Blight. Um, the thing about Hand of Blight, though, is you want to close to melee range. You want to take advantage of that faster attack at melee range. And notice that it also reduces the damage that that enemy does by 1% per stack, so it can reduce it by up to 4%. And then kind of like the secondary one you're going to be running is Hellish Rebuke. So if you're at range, you're going to be using Hellish Rebuke. If you're up close and personal, you're going to be using Hand of Blight. From a AoE rotation perspective, your encounter is going to be Hellfire Ring, Killing Flames, and Curse Bite. Um, Killing Flames isn't necessarily a mandatory thing for AoE. I actually like it because, generally speaking, most trash mobs, even in like the Hell Pit here, or not the Hell Pit, the Avernus, most things are dead by the time I do Hellfire Ring and then Curse Bite. Remember that. So Hellfire Ring, you pop that down. It's applying. It's not the strongest attack in the world, but it is applying a dot. But it also adds curse to all your targets. And then you use Curse Bite, and then generally speaking, things are dead. If there's something still standing, then I can finish it off with Killing Flames, which also then gives me a stack of Soul Investiture. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So that's kind of my general rotation. If I'm in something that's really weak sauce, like in Sharandar or something, I may mix in like Fiery Bolt as another mechanic for, again, adding curse and kind of doing a big AoE burst. It used to be Blades of the Vanquished Army was really fantastic, especially with like the Lost Moth set or with three Tales of the Tales of Old Artifact set. But now it doesn't proc really reliably anymore. When you're single target, you're going to stay with Hellfire Ring. You're going to use Killing Flames, and then you're going to use Hadar's Grasp instead. So Hadar's Grasp will also add a stack of Soul Investiture. And remember, Killing Flames only does that when it kills the target. And then from a daily perspective, your go-to daily for single target is going to be Tyrannical Curse. I've done a lot of testing. Accursed Souls can be pretty decent, and it will, again, grant you a stack of Soul Investiture, but I found that increased damage by 15% for 20 seconds ends up outweighing the Soul Investiture by quite a bit. And then my kind of secondary daily, again, this is more for AoE scenarios, is Gates of Hell. You have to be really careful with Gates of Hell to carefully aim it, and it does have a known issue where if you drop it on uneven terrain, or let's say you drop it on like a boulder on a flat field, it will either undershoot or overshoot your enemies, basically doing no damage to anything. So you pretty much want to be sure you're using it on level terrain. You want to line that up correctly for maximum effect, but it is pretty decent in a trash mob scenario if you're under the ideal conditions. From a class feature perspective, I'm running All-Consuming Curse and No Pity No Mercy in all solo scenarios, and then in many dungeon scenarios, I'm also still running No Pity No Mercy. If you're with a really good group that's very conscious about positioning, um, you will run Dust to Dust instead of No Pity No Mercy. The big thing about No Pity No Mercy is that your critical hits grant you combat advantage over critically hit targets for 4 seconds. So every time you're dropping a crit down, you're granting yourself combat advantage, which is actually a really decent damage gain. But again, if you're in a party that is really, really good about positioning and you always have combat advantage anyway, you're better off going with Dust to Dust, which ups your damage by 5%. From a feat perspective, um, there's only one really controversial feat in here, and I'll talk about that in a second. So there's obviously some changes made for Mod 18 that upped some damage on that, and there were some minor feat changes. First off, I think from a DPS scenario, Double Scorch is definitely better than Power the Nine Hells. That being said, it's still kind of mediocre. Both these selections aren't really that great. And then Warlock's Curse. So again, I keep All-Consuming Curse on all the time. I want to make sure that I'm hitting the target. Whenever I'm hitting the target, it's cursed. It's just I get great curse synergy with the Warlock. And then again, Killing Flames hits harder, Hater's Grasp hits harder when it's hitting a cursed target and it's removing that curse. So now I'm gaining 12% more damage if that target's affected with curse. The only controversial choice really here is Soul Desecration versus Risky Investment, and I always go with Risky Investment. Granted, you're not always getting stacks of Soul Investiture, so the only way you get stack of Soul Investiture is if you're using a power that will summon a Soul Puppet. So there's only a couple of those, Killing Flames, Hater's Grasp, and the Accursed Souls Daily. That being said, it's a little difficult to build up, but it ends up outweighing the cons that come with having a permanent soul puppet. So while you can have a permanent soul puppet, it really doesn't add a lot of damage to you, and it adds a lot of annoyances too. It likes wandering off by itself. Its hits are not at all reliable. It's just the AI behind the soul puppet's kind of lacking, and you're just better off taking away that risk, and then, which is funny considering the feat's named Risky Investment. It's just a Risky Investment's just overall a better pick. If you're a lower geared player, you're just starting out, you may have a use for the soul puppet, but overall it's going to hurt you more than it helps you. For this next feat choice, they did make changes to Creeping Death, but it ends up only being about a 2% actual damage gain. So don't be fooled by your combat logs that show it does about 10% of your overall damage. If you actually do the math, and no worries, really line this out on the forum really well, it ends up being about a 2% damage gain, where Executioner's Gift is clearly better. It works a lot like the Demon Lord set did, and it ends up being about a 9.91% damage increase overall. So it's clearly better than Creeping Death. And then for the last one, Soul Spark Recovery. For every 6 Soul Sparks spent on Soul Scorch, it reduces your encounter cooldowns by 1 second. So that's another thing. You're going to be constantly using your tab mechanic, your Soul Scorch mechanic in here. You want to make sure that when it's up, you use it. Reduce those cooldowns. So from a rotation perspective, how you would look at it from a trash mob, you would use Hellfire Ring, follow it up with Curse Bite, use an at-will to make sure your target's cursed before you use Killing Flames, and of course mix in Soul Scorch where you can. And mix your at-wills again. Don't drop an encounter on something other than Hellfire Ring or Fiery Bolt, unless you've got curses on the target. So again, use your at-will to liberally spread those curses, and then with your big stuff, Killing Flames, Hadar's Grasp, Curse Bite, because Curse Bite only works on targets that are cursed anyway. From a single target perspective, again, lead off with Hellfire Ring. It's going to apply curse to the target. Then use your Hadar's Grasp, which is going to grant you a stack of Soul Investiture, but it's also going to consume your curse. So you've got to mix an at-will in there then, and then you can use Killing Flames for that bigger hit. And then again, you're probably going to you're going to have some cooldown issues, so you're going to be using some at-wills. Preferably, you're going to close the gap and you're getting a melee range. You're going to use that Hand of Blight melee from melee range, and then when you're ready to go, rinse and repeat. Hellfire Ring, Hadar's Grasp, Killing Flames, and mixing Soul Scorch in. So I'm going to pop over to Healer quick. So there's a couple of things to note about the Healer. The Healer, from a stat perspective, is completely different. So I am going to make that call out. I'm not going to talk about it too extensively. With the DPS, you need Armor Pen and Accuracy and Crit Strike and Power. And you want build your crit severity and then combat advantage, right? You don't need to worry about and defense. With a healer, you don't need to worry about combat advantage. You don't need to worry about accuracy. Really, you don't need to worry about armor pen. What matters to you is outgoing healing, power, and crit strike. And then, of course, there is a diminishing return on crit strike, so you want to be kind of careful with that. But overall, your king is outgoing healing and power and crit sev, and again crit strike. And then you'll of course want some defensive stats so that you can be standing there and still healing. From an at will perspective, your go-to at will is actually going to be Essence Defiler. So again, this is going to be doing some damage. It's actually not doing heals, but it's going to be generating soul sparks. And then for single targeted heals, you're going to use soul reconstruction. So this is where a person needs a heal. You're going to stream that heal onto them. You're not going to use this too often. There are definitely cases where you want to use this, like maybe if you're running Tower of the Mad Mage and you're streaming a heal to a tank before they take the Annihilation Ball. From an counter power rotation, this is a little messy right now because I was just running some solo stuff. But when you're running single target, you're going to be running Pillar of Power, you're going to be running Shatter Spark, and you're probably going to be using Hadar's Grasp. You're going to want to avoid Vampiric Embrace if you're in a party with a Paladin Healer. If you're not in a party with a Paladin Healer, definitely mix Vampiric Embrace in there to get some extra temporary hit points to the folks in your party. It really does buy some breathing room. And the plus about Vampiric Embrace is it does not use any Soul Sparks. So really, when you're running single target, the only abilities that you have that are going to be using Soul Sparks are Shatter Spark, which is going to be your big heal, and then your Soul Reconstruction. One other thing to note about Shatter Spark is that it has a cast time, but it actually has no cooldown, so that you can actually burst this out pretty quickly and do some pretty big heals, at the expense, of course, of Soul Sparks. From a daily perspective, my go-to daily is Immolation Spirits, and it's all about Soul Spark generation. So there can definitely be a use for Soul Pact, but the problem with Soul Pact, it really is, kind of a targeted heal, and it's really not that great. Remember, Soul Spark's of magnitude 400. This is only a 500 magnitude heal. Granted, there's some damage reduction there. I find that from a utility perspective, Immolation Spirits generally works better because it's giving me more Soul Sparks. So more Soul Sparks equals more heals from Shatter Spark or from Soul Reconstruction. From a class feature perspective, there's a couple of okay class feature selections. I generally run All-Consuming Curse. Again, I just want to make sure the targets I'm hitting are cursed. And then Warding Curse. So that lowers my afflicted target's damage dealt by 5%. So I'm doing some debuffing on the target. There are some other valid options in here, but generally speaking, I just find that these two work really well, especially for the random queues. From a feat perspective, I run Essence of Power. I've done a lot of testing back and forth. Technically speaking, over time you will get more Soul Sparks using Essence of Time, but I found that in scenarios where you're running low on Soul Sparks, it's way better to just get a big bang of Soul Sparks, because what ends up happening is now you're sitting here siphoning and people are needing heals and you're out of Soul Sparks and you can't burst out Shatter Spark and then people are dead. With this, you tap it quick. It doesn't take very long to cast your tab mechanic, and then you have full Soul Sparks and you can burst those heals out. It can really get you out of trouble really fast. And then of course I do Mending Mastery. It's all, again, upping my outgoing healing. And then I have Lingering Sustain. I found that Lifebind, while it's a fun conceptually, Lingering Sustain just tends to work better because each time your powers heal an ally or yourself, they are granted Lingering Sustain. Lingering Sustain heals for 150 magnitude over 6 seconds. So it's not a very big heal, um, but every little bit helps on the Warlock. And then for this next one, um, it's kind of dealer's choice on this one. Um, I find that From the Brink is much more effective than Thief of Life, so I run that. And then for the last one, powers that consume a Soul Spark generate 10% more action points. So I found that I'm consuming curses a lot less often in this build than I am on the DPS side. So but I'm consuming soul sparks all the time, so I'm gaining a lot more action points, which means, my daily is up more often, which means I'm generating more soul sparks, and the cycle continues. So back to the encounter powers quick. From a trash mob scenario or a solo scenario, so if I'm running solo and not running DPS, because maybe I want a little bit more survivability, or I'm running in a group that, I was running a lot of trash mobs, but they don't need a lot of heals, because they're killing it. I found that Harrow Storm works really great in those scenarios. It doesn't really yes, it uses 3 soul sparks, but because it's doing damage, it's actually you're gaining more soul sparks than you're losing generally, or it's about break even. So you can cast a Harrow Storm on a mob, go to town with DPS. It's doing some trickle heals. The heal magnitude isn't fantastic, but it's not terrible, and it can really help the survivability of a group, especially if there's a bunch of melee sitting there on top of that trash mob. And then also then I run Blades of the Vanquished Army for some personal survivability and just a little bit extra damage. Otherwise, that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, just hit me up on Twitch or make a comment here on the video, and I will try to get back to you. Thank you, and have a fantastic day.